10-mark questions pose a high value in Saxon exams and usually require you to draw knowledge from multiple topics within the course. A practice question relating to content from Unit 3, Area of Study 1, is identify two Qantas stakeholders and describe their interests. Discuss how a conflict of their interests could possibly arise between these stakeholders. Identify a possible ethical and social responsibility issue associated with the conflict, and analyse the possible positive and negative impacts of this ethical and socially responsible issue on Qantas. 10 marks. As this is a lengthy question, it is important to break it down so as to ensure the question is completely understood. It is helpful to do this on the page. This can first be done by highlighting the doing words of the question, which outlines exactly what you are required to do in your response. These include identify, describe, discuss, and analyse. It is important to know the meaning of these terms if you are to successfully answer the question. Secondly, students could underline the key terms of the question, which will form the basis for your response. These include two Qantas stakeholders, interests, conflict, ethical and social responsibility issue associated with conflict, and positive and negative impact. Each of these words or phrases should be addressed within your response, as they will form the foundation of the marks awarded. Finally, students should identify what the joining word is, if any are present, by circling it on the page. In this case, and is the recurring joining word, meaning that students must address all areas of the question to gain full marks. Once the question has been broken down, it is essential to look at the marking scheme to determine what should be included in the response and how it should be structured. In 10-mark questions, it is important to structure the responses in paragraphs, so it is easier and clearer to read, as well as grammatically correct. In this question, it could be interpreted that 2 marks could be awarded for identifying 2 example stakeholders and their interests. This can be determined through identify questions, typically being worth low marks. As the question specifically references Qantas, these stakeholders mentioned must relate to this organisation, otherwise marks may not be awarded. It may also be helpful to define what exactly a stakeholder is, so it is easier to outline how the examples chosen fit into this concept. These marks could also make up one paragraph, seeing as they are grouped together within the question, and also interrelate. A detailed example of this is a stakeholder refers to an individual or group who has a vested interest in the activities of the organisation. An example of a stakeholder at Qantas is the employees, including pilots, flight attendants, and ticket check-ins. Employees act as stakeholders, as they are interested in the activities of Qantas, as the organisation is their main source of income. Employees desire for Qantas to succeed, so they have the possibility of higher wages or salaries and job security, as if Qantas is failing, there is a high chance of pay cuts or even job cuts. Another example of a stakeholder at Qantas is their shareholders. A shareholder refers to an individual who owns a stock or share in the organisation with the aim of receiving dividends. A shareholder, therefore, is a stakeholder, as they have an interest in Qantas succeeding so as to generate a profit and receive greater dividends on their investment. 2 marks may be awarded for the discussion of the conflict between the identified stakeholders. This can be determined as a discuss question requires both sides of the topic to be addressed. Therefore, 1 mark for the first stakeholder and 1 for the second. It is important to ensure that the stakeholders discussed are the same as what was identified in the previous section. The stakeholders' conflict must also be specifically related to Qantas. The interests of both stakeholders must be identified as being different and explained as to why this causes a conflict. This section could also be answered in a separate paragraph. A detailed example being, stakeholders possess different interests and seek different outcomes. For example, if Qantas was to be gaining an increased rate of profit, employees would desire this to be put into their wages, salaries, working conditions, rewards, or incentives. This is due to their belief that they are responsible for the recent successes, as no organisation can operate without its employees. Meanwhile, shareholders would like the profit to be returned to them through dividends. This is due to stakeholders believing that their ownership of Qantas entitles them to share in the successes of the organisation through high returns on their investments. A further 2 marks could be allocated to the identification of an ethical and social responsibility issue. This can be assumed, as identify questions are typically worth low marks, as stated previously. This can include a definition of ethics and social responsibility, and also reference to a specific event considered an issue. The issue chosen should specifically relate to Qantas. The final 4 marks will be awarded for the analysis of the positive and negative impact of the issue described above. It is important to ensure that you don't just state a positive and negative impact, as this will only be awarded 1 mark each. An explanation of why this is a positive or negative impact will be needed to achieve full marks. It must also be ensured that the ethical and social responsibility issue must remain consistent throughout the question. Therefore, when choosing the issue, make sure that both aspects of the question can be answered. A detailed example of this is: ethics refers to the application of moral standards within the organisation, while social responsibility refers to the obligations, above its legal ones, that the organisation has to its stakeholders, the community, and the environment. An example of an ethical and social responsibility issue related to the conflict is for Qantas to use their increased revenue to make the organisation more environmentally sustainable, rather than increasing employees' wages or shareholders' dividends. The advantage of this approach is that it will improve Qantas's public image through protecting the environment. This will also increase the possibility of earning a profit and increase their customer base. However, this does also have the possibility of leading to a loss of productivity and motivation from employees, and reduced investments from shareholders, leading to decreased finances, as these stakeholders were unhappy with the lack of profit returned to them. In 10-mark questions, it is important to carefully read through the question and understand what it is asking. It is important to plan out what you are going to write as an answer. This can be done mentally or briefly on the page. It is also important to make sure you leave enough time to answer the 10-mark question in SACs or exams, as they take up a significant portion of the total marks. It is important to give it your best attempt. Bearing this in mind, be careful not to waste too much time and forget about other questions on the paper. Happy studying!